one. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you. Oh, sorry, y'all. We're so excited to have you to be here for this amazing upcoming chat. Before we dive into to questions or introducing you to our speakers, I just want to go over some couple quick housekeeping items it'll be useful information for you. Again, we are here for the 3 keys to building financial wealth as a professional woman in tech. So if you signed up for multiple events this week, this is the one you're currently attending. If you would like to participate, we want to make sure that you are as able to do that as possible. So we have a couple different options for you. If you would like to, you are more than welcome to turn your cameras on. No need to be Instagram perfect. We are, if you're working like a 3-day messy bun, non-traditional workspace, furry coworkers, all of that stuff is welcome. We want to meet you where you are. So please feel free to turn your cameras on if you would like. Please don't feel pressured. If you want to ask a question or add a comment, you can do so by coming off mute. But if you do come off mute for whatever reason, you will show up on the live recording as well as the streaming of today's event. So if you have any kind of privacy concerns, that's not a problem. You can still participate by putting your questions and comments either into the group chat through Zoom, or you can DM them to me directly. That way I can raise your comments or questions and keep you anonymous. Now, like I said, today's session is being recorded. So if it's a nice way to make sure that you don't feel like you have to take notes in case you miss what somebody says, you can always go back and review later. But it's a really great way to share this event, especially if Lisa or Chris says something today that is just like mind-blowing for you, and you want to share it. You have to tell like a coworker or a relative or a friend. You will be able to. So what's going to happen is in about 1 to 2 business days, everybody that registered for today's event, whether you join us or you don't, everybody's going to get an email from us with a link to where you can rewatch this recording on powertofly.com. Now, if you don't want to wait the 1 to 2 business days, you don't have to. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. I'll share the URL for that in just a moment. It's a dedicated YouTube channel just for all of these chat and learns. There's a huge backlog of episodes. You can go in and look through and search. You can also do that on the Power to Fly website. But you're more than welcome to check those out. You can also keep up with us on various other social media accounts. So if you want to, I very much recommend you follow us on YouTube. It's a good way to make sure that you don't miss videos like this, especially if you don't get a chance to register. But the other thing is you can keep up with us on the other social media channels as well. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you are always welcome to take pictures or video as we go and share it out to your network. We would love to retweet or reshare anything that you post about us so that we can help keep, kind of growing this community and sharing these resources with as many people as possible. To kind of bring the Power to Fly bit to an end, just know that there are a bunch of ways that you can connect with us and participate in today's discussion as well as keep learning from us. So hopefully you guys are excited to meet our speakers. So first up today, we have Lisa Kostova. So Lisa is the founder of the CareerClimb framework, as well as the CareerClimb suite of executive development programs. These are aimed at mid-career females in technology. She's also the host of the Female Tech Exec podcast. Now, prior to launching CareerClimb, Lisa spent decades as a VP of product and a senior product executive in Silicon Valley. She worked for a number of consumer and enterprise companies. Just switched my slide. There we go. Lisa has an MBA from the Harvard Business School, an undergrad degree from Wharton School of Business, and has been featured as a thought leader in the Harvard Business Review. She's also featured as a thought leader in the book Cracking the PM Interview, as well as other publications. Sorry, y'all, English is hard for me today. You'll see on her slide there, I'm going to share with y'all in just a moment the link to a challenge thing that Lisa's going to tell you about in a little bit. But joining Lisa today as her co-star is going to be Chris Welton. Chris is a wealth management advisor with Northwestern Mutual. Chris leads a team that works together with their clients to implement a financial plan that integrates risk management, wealth management, tax efficient strategies, as well as estate planning. As someone who used to work for an attorney that did a lot of these things, I can tell you it's not an easy job. So Chris knows a lot of things, and I'm super excited that you all will get to learn from him today. So Chris earned an undergrad degree in poli-sci with magna cum laude at Amherst College in Massachusetts. He also has an MBA from UCLA's Anderson School of Management and holds both chartered financial analyst certifications and certified financial planner designations. So Chris and his wife, Rosa, are avid health nuts. They love to cook and entertain and are especially proud of the vegetables they've grown in their garden during the pandemic. So welcome, Chris and Lisa. We're so happy to have you both. Is there anything either of you would like to add to your bios before we dive into today's conversation?
We've closed the garden for the year on things, but next year we're looking forward to it.
Same here. So that's probably pretty smart. All right. So I know that y'all have a presentation that you'd like to jump into first. Do you need the slides that I have up next, or would you like me to stop sharing so that you all can take center stage?
I am fine without the slides.
Okay.
Chris, do you have slides that you want to share?
I can share the screen, but Lisa, why don't you kick things off, and then we can segue to the financial discussion. I'll have different charts we can do depending on the conversation.
Oh, I love it. He comes with data. That's my kind of guy.
All right. I'll be sitting back seat, hanging out in the chat and listening to you all talk. So please feel free, take it away.
Yes. Well, hello, everyone. I am happy to see so many familiar faces here and some new ones. Welcome. So Chris and I actually met through Chris's wife, Rosa. The reason I mentioned Rosa is because she is in many ways a role model for what is possible for women in tech today. She is one of our clients, of our CareerClimb members, and I came to also know Chris because he not only does the talk, but he also walks it. He's Rosa's biggest supporter, and really as somebody who honestly had a former marriage that was not supportive at all for my own career, I really appreciated the way Chris showed up for Rosa in our community, and how much truly he was a fan and somebody who was invested in her own growth, professional development, and also by extension, financial success. So first of all, I want to compliment Chris. Chris, thank you for being a supportive partner. Do you want to, before we delve into the 3 points that we wanted to bring to our audience this morning, do you want to just let everyone know what it takes to be an advocate for the financial success of your wife and for her own personal and professional development? Like, where does that come from?
Self-interest, pure self-interest. We've been married 20 years, and thank you for all the wonderful compliments and so forth. It's lovely to hear that. And I mean, I think we met, Rosa, my wife, and I met back in New York in the late 90s. And, we've been married since 2003, but I really sort of 99 was kind of when we met together. So we've been together since the last century as well. When we're thinking about this, we really have just worked as partners for many, many years. We really have viewed everything as something that we accomplished together. It's very odd to think that wouldn't be the case. It's just not intuitive. And part of that is we've known each other now since kind of our early to mid 20s. So that's kind of nice. That's been come there. I think in terms of career stuff, Lisa's program has been transformative for Rosa. It's been huge. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, personally as well. And so I look for her to tell me how I can support her, and also to challenge her a little bit in terms of goals and thinking on stuff. And we kind of do that for each other a bit as we go through our careers. And we've done that in the past too. I mean, there's sort of plenty of work before we even got here. A decision for her to go to business school and thinking about what would move things forward. And it was a mix of things where it was sort of pointing out the right directions that I thought or she thought for me, or vice versa, were helpful, but also knowing when to articulate those and when to like take a step back also. So I remember suggesting to her, probably 15 years ago that business school, or 16 years ago, would be really helpful for her. And she was kind of like, well, not yet. And I want to take some time on it. And I was kind of like, well, I'm not so sure. I think it actually would be really helpful, but I bit my tongue. And and I said, well, let's just take the time. And at the time, she had a nice job in tech, and she was working in Santa Monica, and she really liked the people she was working with, and it was good. And eventually, she sort of came around to the idea that, listen, maybe getting an MBA would, help sort of open some career doors and networking and learn some things and all that kind of stuff. And so she ended up doing the part-time program at UCLA Anderson. We lived in LA at the time, which was a fantastic program. We're still very involved with the school. And you get to get an MBA and keep your job, which is kind of nice. And at the time, you could also deduct it on your taxes, which apparently you can't do anymore. So and then I kind of learned from her. And so I saw that she was getting a lot out of it. And I realized that maybe I should take some of my own medicine and, go and do the same thing. So a year later, I entered that same program. But I think that kind of challenge and being able to talk through, but also give each other space and talk about goals and accomplishment. And also I've discovered being able to sort of push a little, or say, why not do the next level, or why not do something a bit more on things, has been really helpful for both of us. And she's challenged me in my practice and our growth, and vice versa on it. So anyway, that was a bit of a lengthy answer, but hopefully on point.
I think that is very important, because it is so important for us as women to have someone or multiple individuals in our lives who act as advocates. These could be our partners, these could be our family, friends. So important, because I remember when I graduated, both undergrad and as well as when I graduated from the MBA program, I just was so naive. I thought the world was this completely egalitarian, completely open opportunities for everyone. Because I've always had access to great education, to great schools. I've always considered myself lucky, even though I came from an Eastern European background. Like when I was really, really little, I grew up behind the Iron Curtain. So there was no opportunity when I was super young, but afterwards, and I remember distinctly the shock. I experienced the shock when, what was it, like about 7-8 years after I graduated from my MBA, one of my favorite professors became the dean of the Harvard Business School. And he embarked on a program to equalize the playing field for men and women in the program. And I was shocked, Chris and everyone, to discover that my class, when we graduated, were 33% women, but of the Baker Scholars, so this is the top, 5-10% by academic achievement graduating class, only 9% were women. And so nobody had ever shared that stat with us, that piece of data with us. And it was liberating and freeing to understand that. And also it was great. It was a great, I felt amazed that the school managed to turn that around in a number of years. It was basically the way that we were being graded in class participation and what the professor remembered. Most of the professors were men. And so they would tend to remember the comments that were made by men more so that were made by women. So that got shifted and that got worked on. And now there's, an equal or a representative percentage of women that are in that top tier. But I think this is so common. This is so common for women. And if you can relate to this, drop it in the chat. We just end up feeling like the world is our oyster. And it's not that it's not, but we need to understand that the playing field is a little bit more tricky. And because of that, we can't just rely on things to be given to us or be presented to us the same way that they were when we were younger or when we were in school. So there's a couple of pieces of data I want to set up our first point on. And it is the data that honestly got me on my mission and vision to change the playing field in tech for women, specifically in mid-career, where there's a lot of dropping out happening. So one piece of data is, and I apologize, this was not in the slides, but I'll just walk you through it. When I believe this is not just tech, but there's a data that looks at career progression for men and women and by age category. So the first bucket is ages 20 to 29, then there's 30 to 44 and age 45 and over. So in the first bucket, when we are super young, an equal percentage of men and women are in kind of the individual contributor role, equal percentage are in the manager and supervisor role, equal percentage are in that executive level role. Very, very small, but it's equal. Then things start changing dramatically at age 30 to 44, mid-career, where we see that by that point, men are at 4% of them are in the executive roles, 7% of them are in director level roles, and 38% are in manager roles. Now for women, that's like half as much, 2% versus 4% are executive level, about the same are director level, and only 30% compared to 38% are managers. And now looking at 45 and over, it's even worse. 8% of men by that point are the executive level compared to only for 4% of women. So kind of pulling that back and understanding where that what that comes with, it's not important to me. I think it's not important to you, Chris, to kind of understand what causes it as much as like, okay, well, this is the current reality. How do we deal with it? How do we as women stack more decks in our in our hand, more cards in our hand? And obviously this disparity also comes with a pay gap. So Glassdoor did a research, and I'll drop it afterwards in the chat, but there's like a pay gap study that Glassdoor did recently. And they basically said that in the United States for the information technology sector, the pay gap between men and women is 5.9%, which does not sound like a whole lot, but bear in mind, this is like similar levels. And about a third of that pay gap is unexplained, meaning like can't explain it, but based on like what company you're working for, what type of product, etc. So, full 1/3 of it is unexplained, which if you kind of remember the law of compounding actually ends up becoming a big difference by the time you're ready to retire, by the time you get older. So I kind of want to set the stage with that scary stat, just put it out there and have Chris introduce our first kind of concept for combating that. And Chris, do you wanna kind of tee that off? What is the most important thing to do, especially early on in your career, in order to kind of not let that stat drag you down financially?
Yeah, I'd say there's two things that are related. The first is to don't be afraid to interview for jobs you feel you're unqualified for, level up type of thing. What we'd see over and over again is that recruiters are always happy to do laterals or level down. So there's a need to sort of constantly fight to network to move up to the next level. And it's really hard. And I prior to becoming a financial advisor, I worked for 10 years in companies and I struggled with it. And that one is very important. The second thing I would say is when you get in the job offer piece, make sure you ask for more. One of the things that I do internally as I mentor new advisors. And there's definitely, I mean, everyone's a bit different and they all have their own backgrounds, but there's definitely some trends in that, some of the men will tend to be a little oblivious about putting themselves into things for which they're not really qualified for, and to fail at those things. But through those failing, they learn, and sometimes they succeed. And as a result, they're able to get those rewards on things. Whereas a lot of the women that I mentor, there's sort of this real perception that they need to be ready enough or competent enough on them. And a lot of my coaching there is more about, listen, just put yourself in there, and it's okay to fail. In fact, I'd like to see you fail a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit on that. And so when we're looking at a job negotiation, or compensation in particular, one of the big things that we'd want to see is, and there's sort of, if you think about finding a job as a timeline, there's exactly one point in that timeline where any of us have any kind of leverage. And that's from the moment you get the offer until the moment you accept it. And so what's very important is to sort of expand that and kind of step into it, and don't be rushed. And one of the services that we provide to clients is sort of consultations on this. And not infrequently, we work with clients and advising them in this, looking at offers. And so there's always a financial consideration here. They may come back with equity or with stock or, base compensation, or sometimes there's competing offers, in which case we'll have to look at both together on that. But it's important not to rush, and it's important to kind of know what you don't know, or more precisely, like, know that there might be things you don't know that are important in there. And oftentimes, and this is not specific to women, this is pretty much, this happens frequently for lots of people, is the thought is, hey, I got the offer, man, that was a grueling process. The job seems pretty good, or I'm really excited about it. And it looks like everybody's in a rush to get this done. Why don't we just say yes and move on? I mean, that's okay. And it's probably pretty accurate, but what we tend to find there is that you leave money on the table, and you also, importantly, leave a lot of other soft things on the table, potentially, like being able to come in the right way, being able to structure it, essentially, and so forth. Many years ago, I worked at a startup where we hired we had a key role we were hiring, which is a VP of sales. And this was the type of role, if we got the right person, it was really going to move the company up to the next level. And we knew who we wanted. There was a VP at a sort of well-established, competitor in the space that was quite good. And we went after him and made him an offer, and he came back. And he then sort of proceeded to negotiate with us over the course of a month on the terms he was going to join on. And he didn't leave his role. He didn't come into the startup until he made darn sure he had everything set up exactly the way he wanted. He had maximized every piece of that deal. Now, in his case, he may have gone a little too far. There were a number of points in the negotiation where people on the other side were kind of like, do we really want to go this far to get this guy? And it also raised the bar for him, because when he came in, everybody became, there's an emotional thing. Everybody became super excited about him, because they said, this is the guy we worked so hard to get. So there's kind of this endowment effect. We wouldn't have worked so hard if he wasn't worth it. But it also raised the expectations for him. He then had to deliver in a big way. And so, you just have to make sure that as you're doing that, you're also managing your success as you're getting set up there. So one of the big points we make on the compensation side is ask for more, and importantly, realize what is able to be provided. In a corporate environment, many of you probably have hired people, and you know how it goes, right? You open a rec, and they have a budgeted range, and there's a little bit of wiggle room within the budget. But after that, you might have to go for approval or reconfigure the role and so forth on stuff. So you want to maximize that way you can, but you also want to look at what else can the manager provide to you that is valuable to you that wouldn't be hard for them to provide. And so some of the things I like thinking about in there are, perhaps having their commitment to support you. And that support could take a variety of roles. And this is going to depend a lot on the manager and on the company, and also what they are authorized to provide. It could be anything from, they just say something over the phone and they can't really do much about it other than just have their word, to it could be in writing or, some other formal thing. But things like accelerated reviews. If you are brought in a certain role and then and then the manager is able to say, listen, on the next review cycle, we will put you up for consideration at these roles, assuming that we do X, Y, or Z. And those are the areas that can often be a lot softer or more conversational on things. And one of the things that I've kind of seen with clients and personal experience is that once you're inside the company, it becomes a lot squishier, right? Managers get, they leave, they get reassigned, they move around. So what are the promises and what's the career path that you're able to do in there? So having that conversation while you're considering accepting the offer, of really filling out the vision of what it would look like to come on board, and that gut feel of what not just the job, but what that career path could look like and how that might support you. That, I think, is the big opportunity.
Yeah, so Chris, you covered a lot there, and I want to kind of highlight a few of the points you made. So the first key that Chris and I wanted to present to you is the asking piece and the importance of asking. And Chris illustrated that beautifully. I want to bring in a little bit of my own kind of comparative experience of having worked with and hired men and women, having had men and women on my teams, on my product teams in the Valley. And that is consistently over and over again, I saw men take it more for granted that they could ask for the next level. They could ask for more responsibility. They could ask for the next project. They could ask for a raise. And here's the thing that actually ends up working well for that approach. You ask more frequently and in smaller increments, and through the law of compounding, that makes it easier for your manager or the person you're negotiating with to say yes, because you're talking about smaller increments. But then frequently enough, smaller increments compound to big gaps, right? To big results, because you're never leaving money on the table. So what happens is, and I've seen this with women in our community. I know a lot of you guys on this call are CareerClimb members, so you will know this firsthand. We've worked with so many of you directly on this. That puts a lot of pressure on women if they don't take the same approach of frequently asking while they're in their job. I see a lot of women take the approach of loyalty towards a company, meaning that like, oh, let me not ask. I should be happy with what I'm getting. They've done so much for me. They're employing me during this, crisis. They've sponsored my visa, whatever it is for some of you who may have been here on work visas. And, and what ends up happening is, practically speaking, and also psychologically speaking, it's much harder when you come to the point of negotiating a new offer for the new employer to then close that gap. Because now you're looking at asking for a lot more than you're making, because you haven't been keeping up with like asking for raises consistently. Now, all of a sudden you're looking at like, oh, shoot, I'm below market. And now and recruiters are like bloodhounds. They have a nose for blood. They will sniff you out if you're even like an iota uncertain or insecure about asking for the money. And you are more likely to be if you're getting paid lower. Right. So the cost of not constantly asking at like frequent intervals for smaller increments is huge. It's harder to close that gap. It's harder to take that leap. It can be done, but it requires a lot of coaching and prep and role playing and like building your confidence and arming yourself with data. It's a lot easier to just, as you're going through your career, to constantly ask. And I really want to underscore, I've seen a huge difference with men and women with that behavior inside of companies while you are on your role. And what Chris said earlier is really, I want to offer an observation that supports his point on, when somebody is negotiating an offer, there's this pressure and it feels uncomfortable, especially if you're uncomfortable around the area of negotiation. You just want to get it done with. You just want to get it like over with so you can like not create this awkwardness with your new boss or your new company. I've seen a lot of women actually approach this part of the process, this very necessary part of the process, almost with like a sense that the company is doing them a favor by giving them an offer, and not recognizing that a lot of times companies, especially in the tech sector, when they first give you an initial number, most of the time it's just unless they're like super structured and pay transparent, most of the time, especially if they're smaller private companies, that's their first offer. It's almost like they're going to throw a number to you to see if you're going to bite. And then they kind of expect you to come back and start the negotiation process. If you settle at the first thing they throw at you, 99% of the time you're leaving money on the table. And Chris is going to go into like what's more flexible, salary versus equity, and we can talk about that. And the second key, which is knowing what's on the table, what cards you can play. But Chris, do you want to say something to kind of support this first point we're bringing to them, the importance of asking frequently and often?
Yeah, actually, there's a nice question in the chat here. So from Evelyn Chow. Evelyn, so thank you for asking this. I'll read it out. And if folks have more questions, we can go off the chat here. So it's helpful to make this as direct and relevant as possible. When I was negotiating this summer, my questions were: number one, how many rounds? Number two, how much to ask? Number three, what are the increments? Number four, what should the breakdown be between equity versus base? No job is the same, even though there are so much info online, finding the right one is still difficult. All right, so let me sort of talk about that a little bit. It depends a lot on level. There are some very, very, very ballpark rules of thumb. So things I would ask, Steph, if you wanted to maybe make a few bullet point notes on this, because I have a feeling we're going to get asked to send this around later. But the things that we want to look at are: is the company public or private? If it's public, what's the stock price trading at? If it's private, what was the last valuation done at? Private companies typically will do, they have to have a value for the stock. Typically that comes in the form of either the most recent round, if that was recent and that was a good valuation round, or they might do something called a 409A, that's 409A valuation. The 409A, like all valuations, is a made up number. It's not a price. So it's not real, quote unquote, but it's the best that people have on that. What we often see, even at the most senior levels, is the base salaries are cap out usually in sort of the 200 to 400,000 range, and above that number, almost all the compensation comes from equity. A very ballpark rule of thumb that I was trained on many years ago was that not each sort of incremental level, like going from sort of a, Rosa used to work at eBay, so they would talk about things like a 27, 26, 25. But if you're thinking going from like senior manager to director to senior director to VP, each incremental level should get roughly twice the equity of the level below it. Pause on that for a second. Twice. Okay, so that should give you a lot of incentive to fight to get to that next level, right? Overall, what we see over and over again is people do not fully appreciate how much their senior managers are compensated, and how much more in particular. And it makes it very much kind of worth fighting for to kind of move up that ladder on things. And being at a VP level is a world of difference from being at a senior director, or senior manager level financially. The issue with doing equity is, and there's a few forms that you can get equity. The most likely kind is if you're interviewing at a public company, you will get something called a RSU, or restricted stock unit, or for those of you that work out or interviewing at Google, a GSU, or Google stock unit, because Google has to do everything a little better. They're actually the same, but they call them a GSU, go figure. And the way those work is you're given equity in the company, and that equity trades. It's just the stock. It has a restriction on it, and that restriction comes off typically after a year. And then after that, it's typically either monthly or quarterly vests. And so what would happen is you would have your initial grants, and then you'd have a year where you got nothing, or more precisely, it was out there waiting. Okay. And then you have a first vest for that year. And then from that point forward, it would be either monthly or quarterly, depending on the company. A couple things to note about that. The stock is still moving around during that point. So if you think about the job offer has to assume a certain number of shares at a certain point in time. So the single best thing you can do from a career perspective is join a company whose stock is going up. Single worst thing you can do is join one whose stock is going down. Okay. And so that's one piece that we'll talk to about clients. I have one client in particular who did modeling for like self-driving cars. And she was looking at offers, two offers. One was a, self-driving mobility company you would instantly recognize. They had a very volatile stock price. And the other was with a very old line automobile manufacturer. And you would think that she would go to the mobility company, and they threw lots and lots of shares. But we realized in the course of kind of a few rounds of negotiation supporting her in this, that it just wasn't going to be worth it because those shares were funny money. Like there really was no value they were done. It was a very volatile stock and it went up and down a lot. So whatever number we came up with today, there was really no certainty that the stock was going to be that or here or up here later. And it came down to, she didn't really have a great feeling about the actual company. As it turns out, about a year or two later, they actually sold that group to the company she ended up joining. And she's, I think, now managing that group. And the number on paper was quite large up front, but the number was not real. That's kind of the key point. And so the more, boring offer, if you will, which involved things like a pension and a company car and stuff like that. She actually had more certainty of making the money. And it ended up actually being more valuable and putting more in the pocket, because what ended up happening is the stock at the mobility company did end up cratering. And so the very large number that they were throwing at her was not, in fact, what she would have gotten after a year on that. So understanding the actual company and understanding its business prospects, checking in with, financial advisors, folks like me, and what that looks like to the outside world, not to necessarily folks on the inside, can be a really important reality check. And thinking through where that stock goes. I mean, one of the best places to have been over the last few years was Facebook from a financial perspective, not least because if you joined here, the stock went up substantially over the next several years. So really, if you did nothing than just show up for work, you made a lot of money and didn't really have much to do with how you did your individual job at a company that size.
And Chris, I just want to make sure that so you just drop a couple of really, really important points there. And I'm looking at time and making sure that we have saved time for a third key, which is the strategy piece. So what Chris has been covering all the last couple of minutes here has been knowing what you can play with, kind of knowing your pieces on the chess table, right? And Chris, I think the value of working with a financial advisor like you is that everybody's circumstances are unique. Everybody's life situation is unique. So just to give you a little bit of my experience, I actually build most of my wealth through swings in the equity of private companies. So I kind of, I played on that roulette table, if you want. And I did take, lower cash compensation in order to get as much of the equity as I could. I also subsequently got burned on a couple of pieces, including because there is a huge tax implication in the United States. If you are working for a private company, you're getting paid in equity, and that equity is valued because companies go through rounds of valuation. So your equity could be valued really high, but there's no liquid market for it. That means you can't just go and sell your shares. You're getting your options. And so if you choose to convert your options to shares, upon leaving the company, for example, that may result in the IRS, right? Asking you to write a check for whatever, 30-40% of that quote unquote gain, even though you haven't seen any money come from it. And then afterwards, the stock may crater. So you may be completely out of pocket on equity. The equity piece is really, really, really tricky. And I say, if you can do anything, just imagine you're an investor. Okay. And Chris has got the data. Imagine
keep
you're an
going. This is a great
investor.
segue. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I just want to make this point. Because I was before working in tech, I worked in an investment management capacity. I was like an investment analyst. And so I really want every single one of you, this is my wish for every woman in tech or in corporate in general, treat your time as you would your most precious capital. Be the investor of your own time and maximize the value of your time. So looking at joining a company, you should be looking at it like an investor. So Chris, want to make sure we save time for the third key, but do you want to just cover, since you're showing something really interesting here, do you want to cover that kind of double-edged sword of evaluating the equity piece? Because it could be a game, it could be a multiplier on your wealth. It could also leave you in the red if you're not careful. And you need to also know like other options you have around dealing with that piece, like Chris is going to mention like early exercise, if it makes sense, like asking the company to extend the option for you to convert your options to equity for, a longer period of time. All of these have been pieces that I've known individuals who've negotiated them, including myself. So you're not locked in. There's always pieces on the chess table that you can play. Chris, do you want to explain what we're looking at?
Sure. So I think the discussion we had before was really RSUs and public companies. So if we take that, where the other side of that is, if you want to take a little more risk, mostly where you're going to see this today is private companies, earlier stage companies, but you'll see stock options. They're less common than they used to be. I don't think we're going to have time to go into stock options in detail today, which is fine. But suffice to say, if you would like to know more, shoot a note to me or the staff channel my team here, and we can send you this equity compensation in brief, and happy to do a call to walk through the basics on this. But there are two main types, and I sort of like this color-coded chart because I like things that are colored. But this talks about, I use this as a shorthand to kind of jog my memory about how options are taxed. And in particular, options, RSUs have quite a bit of complexity to them as well, but options have sort of even more. So if you're joining an early stage startup, you may be given an option, and an option is the right, but not the obligation to purchase a share of stock. Okay, so it's actually a derivative financial instrument. It's derivative off of the underlying share. So you have a kind of a second layer of complexity with options, which is you have to figure out whether you want to exercise those options, and if so, under what timeline. Options have something called an exercise price, which is what you have to pay to exercise the option and convert it into the underlying share. Depending on when you join the company, the exercise price could be almost nothing at an early stage company to enormous. And there's two main different kinds of options. There's something called incentive stock options, ISOs. These tend to have better tax treatment, but there's limits on how you can manage those, and there's easy ways to disqualify them. Those also have the AMT implication. The AMT implication was a huge deal. It's become a little less common with some of the rise up in there, but suffice it to say, you can still leave a lot of money at the table. And often what we'll talk with on clients is the first place to start is to think about, is to analyze your option grants, your dates, and look at various tax and capital gains treatments for those, and to map that out. We usually do that with the client, with the tax professional as well. It's also very important to think about the state you're in. California taxes long-term capital gains as ordinary income. So for those of us who are California residents, we often have to tack on an additional 9.3 to 13.3% onto our long-term capital gain rate. And that can actually change the thinking about how we'd want to do this, because for many of us, that means our long-term capital gain rate is pretty close to our ordinary income rate, which means there isn't necessarily the same logic we might think there is from Googling for how long should I hold my RSUs or my options and things. It tends to put a lot of more things into play there. The point I would make on options is you want to evaluate the company, make sure it's actually something you want to join that you think is going to go up substantially. That's always job one. But then job 2 is, would you want to own the stock, and what are the areas that you can do around that? And then you could have ISOs or non-quals. And then your company may also give you an option, or let's call it an opportunity to be less confusing, an opportunity called an 83B election. This is done at the board level and is provided out to employees. And this would be to exercise your stock options early to get preferential tax treatment. All of this is sort of in the vein of, do you really want to own the stock? And then the third is how you want to exercise, right? So do you want to pay a check, okay, and write actual cash to own the stock, and then hold that stock for a while in the hopes that it goes up or you get better tax treatment? That can be good, but if you join later as an executive, that can be a very large check. I've had clients where they've had to write a check in the millions of dollars for that. The second is you can do something called a cashless exercise. And a cashless exercise sounds good. Who doesn't want to do a cashless exercise? The problem is that immediately puts you into the highest tax treatment. So it's very tax inefficient as a way to do it. You can also do a blend of the two. But those are typically strategies you'd look at relative to your personal financial position. The last thing I'd say on this is a lot of this depends on where you're at personally. What we often tell clients is that your first liquidity event is really to sort of fulfill a lot of your needs, and you don't necessarily get to be tax efficient until your second or later events, because you don't have all the resources you might in the first event. And so you kind of, the job of the first liquidity event is to sort of fulfill your life goals and make sure you can be financially independent and so forth in there, and taxes are a bit secondary. After that, we're looking at sort of higher levels that you can choose to be efficient or choose to take on more risk if you'd like to on things.
I like that, Chris. I like that you talk about first, second, third liquidity events.
We're always our clients' biggest fans and very optimistic.
No, this is why it's so important. So many women just like go through this process, get whatever equity grants, get their offers, and they're oblivious to, like, oh my God, it's like in the investment world, there's this term called fiduciary duty. And I want everybody to have a fiduciary duty to yourselves, to really be a custodian of your own time, because your career, the time value of money that you're spending is worth real dollars. It's worth millions of dollars. I want you to realize that. And just like you wouldn't do like important financial decisions in your life without professional support, I encourage you to have someone like Chris who is going to be there with you. And there's no like, it doesn't really matter how much quote unquote you have in the bank right now, because what a financial advisor or what somebody like Chris looks at is like your potential, because they look at your time and how you're building your career, and that has monetary value. And so I want you to understand, you have monetary value, even though you may not have realized it yet as much. You may be earlier on in your career, or you might have some catching up to do. But as long as you're still working, there is incredible value in your time and where you choose to spend it. And you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family, you owe it to your financial wealth to negotiate for that, to take care of it, to plan around it, which brings us to the third key, which is strategize. And in my sense, and I don't want to be like
Lisa,
a salesperson for Chris, but it's so important to have somebody to help guide you with that strategy.
Yeah, no, thank you. Can I hop in with a quick story on this? Because I think,
of course, yeah.
We had and thank you for that. As a side note, I am a fiduciary, in case anyone's wondering on that. So that comes up. Fiduciary is fancy talk for a financial advisor who must at all times work in your best interest. And as a CFP, I work under that standard. We had a prospective client recently who called up, and I think this is sort of the basic stuff. It actually sort of gets much more complex when you already have something. And that's something I have kind of an increased appreciation for. Many of you that are already working, if you leave the job, you lose something, right? And so this gets talked about less. So a real world example, I had a client, a woman who called up and said, she's legal at a company that recently went public. And she didn't actually have a lot of equity before it went public, but now on paper, she's worth 8 to 10 million. Cool. That's a pre-tax number, so cut that in half. Just sorry to be a little bit of a downer. And then she said, but you know what? I think I have a better job that I can move up a level and move from assistant general counsel to general counsel, which is a big step. I'll do that, and I will give up about $6 million. What's the right move? Like, I don't think there's an analytic answer to it, but these are the types of things that you will be confronted with, which is, depending on the company, on the role, it could be great. If she doesn't get along with the board and the CEO, it could be horrible, and she could have left $6 million on the table. There aren't really good ways to hedge that. And that's actually a key kind of negotiation thing. You can talk to employers about whether they'd make you whole or somehow close the gap. And I find, for better or for worse, folks who come from a sales background tend to be a little more aware of this. Folks from a technical background, engineering, product, marketing, and maybe a little less so. That's a key thing to ask, is if there's some ways they can mitigate the risk. So for instance, imagine that you're at, Facebook or Google, you have a lot of RSUs that will vest going forward, and you'd have to leave to go to a speculative company where it will take you a year to revest. That's a huge income gap that you have to go back, and there's a career risk, and you're leaving a lot of fairly for sure money on the table to do more speculative money on things. Like, what happens if you want to go back? One of the other big pieces there I would advise is to make sure you have a return strategy. So if it doesn't work out at the new place, you at least have a way to get back in and sort of get back to something where you were before. I think that's having a backdoor strategy like that can be really, really helpful.
No, this is fantastic. And we have so much more that we can talk to you about. Chris has so much knowledge and expertise, and I love what you shared, Chris. For those of you who don't know us at CareerClimb, I want to encourage you to check out our next free Product VP Challenge, which is happening in January. It's going to be updated with all new material. And you can sign up and get on our email list at productvpchallenge.com. We run those quarterly so far. So if you're looking at this as a recording, please check us out and get on our email list. We'd love to help you negotiate more and help you get ahead in your career. And Chris, how can people get in touch with you? Do you want to mention your email address or any other way to get in touch?
Sure. If you look in the chat, feel free to email me at christopher.welton. Christopher's CHRISTOPHER. For any of you that are planning to have kids, please don't name them Christopher, name them like John or something short. Okay, Christopher doesn't fit on any forms. And Christopher.Welton, WELTON @nm.com. It's in the chat. And then you can also email Stephanie Chen on my team here. And Steph, if you want to say hi or wave. And we're more than happy to send you equity compensation in brief. We also have a bunch of other materials, and also more than happy to give 20, 30 minutes, no expectations, one-on-one, to just talk through stuff. And what we tell you is, anytime you have a job offer or a move you're considering, or simply want to work through on financial planning or just talk through and understand equity or any of this stuff, always happy to give 20, 30 minutes and hop on a Zoom and a call and walk you through things. And a lot of our job is to really be sort of financial educators and kind of empower you over that. And then, from there, it goes where you want it to go. And typically we work on a fee basis, which think of it as hiring a consultant who can help you with all your money and financial questions and build a team around you to support you. And we can get employment attorneys, other folks around you that are CPAs and tax professionals and other people that you need to make good decisions on things.
Great. So Meg, do we want to open up for questions, or do you want to wrap up on your end? Because we only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we had time.
Yeah, sure. So we have about 4 minutes. I'm not sure it's enough to get to a specific question, but let's just let me see what was most asked. All right. So let's say that you have not had a lot of these conversations with your current employer and you are trying to figure out maybe where you stand with the company. Do either of you have any suggestions on how to start that conversation? Like if you are past the prime negotiating time of, before, after the offer's been extended, but before you've accepted, are there specific ways or like specific people within your org that you should reach out to talk to about this? Is this something you go to your manager with or something you should go to HR with?
Is this like you're already working in the job, or is this you've
Yeah.
accepted and you haven't started yet?
No, you've accepted, you've started, you're already working the job.
I would say go find a new, go get an offer somewhere else. Yeah. And the best way to get a raise is to go get another job.
Yeah.
That's
So this
absolutely
is it's funny because you see the male and female perspective here so clearly, and see Chris has no qualms about that, and I don't have qualms about it either. There's companies like Netflix that actively encourage you to stay in the market, and that's what we encourage all our clients to do the same. But I would also put in a caveat. What I've seen a lot of women do is kind of be passive with the relationships with their manager. So I encourage anyone to just develop a relationship with their manager to a point where if they see that this manager is interested in supporting them and they trust this manager, then that's the best foundation on which to build sharing of your professional goals. Like if you're working with a coach, then you'll be sharing where you want to go in the next year, in the next 3 years, five years. And so really enrolling that manager in your in your goals so that you get an ally who can then give you at least, all of these are great outcomes. They can either support you and put you up for a promotion or raise. They can be your advocate, or they can give you a clear read on the situation if it's a dead end, because now they have a relationship with you and they'll support you to kind of move on to whatever is next best for you. So my advice is yes, do get market information and counter offers or additional offers, but always start with investing in the relationship with your manager, building allies, building relationships where you are, because if you're just bringing it up out of the blue, it sounds very transactional and it turns it into a very transactional conversation. You want to have set up the context for the conversation first.
That's a great point. Like having that clear view, and managers are people and they're limited. So understand those limitations. Promotions are in almost every organization are scarce and rare and hard to get. And so understand kind of the context they're working in and be real. But two concrete things that I would advise everyone to do is network within your company to a level 1 or 2 levels above you. So I think, personally, I think an easy strategy is just set a goal of like having coffee with a director or every director or VP that you're around, and then do that broadly within the company. Because if you want to move within the company, that's actually extremely helpful. And then they at least know who you are and you can have a chance to tell them your story. And the second is sort of always be at some level in the market, looking at what else is out there and what's available, because you never quite know when the next strong thing is going to come up as well, in addition to having a good relationship with your manager.
Excellent. I want to thank you both so much for coming today and having this great conversation. I know we are at time, so unfortunately we won't have time for questions today, but thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Please feel free to reach out to Lisa or Chris or Stephanie at the email addresses that they were giving for you. And I really hope that y'all got as much out of today's session as I did. So as we go off and kind of finish off our sign off, I just want to say again, thank you, Chris and Lisa, for spending time with us today. This was really amazing.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
We're more than happy to have you. Now, this is going to round us out, so I'll cut us off here. But just know that if you are new to Power to Fly or new to this event series, we hope that we will see you again soon. And if you are one of our frequent flyers, we can't wait to see you again on an upcoming chat. Have a good rest of your Tuesday, everybody. And we'll see you later. Bye.